Okay, thank you for joining us today at JALT International 2020. Please welcome Jason Lowe's, who will be presenting Testing Effective Test Prep, What Works Best. Please go ahead, Jason.
All right, well, firstly, thank you very much for choosing to attend this presentation. There are lots of interesting presentations on the go, and thank you for choosing to come to this one. My name is Jason Lowe's, and I teach at Fukuyama University in Hiroshima. The area of research that I focus on is sometimes called Mind, Brain, and Education, or MBE. This is an interdisciplinary field that brings together psychology, neuroscience, and pedagogy. So each of the fields can inform the other about findings, and then they could be maybe applied in a context that someone's not aware of. I would like to use some information from MBE to inform what's most effective or efficient way to prepare students for multiple choice tests. Now, I submitted the proposal for this, and I'd started this work before COVID. And then COVID came on, and I lost access to my students. So I was not able to actually complete the research yet. So I don't have findings to show today. That said, I think that there are a lot of interesting theories or information that you could apply to your own teaching practice. So I hope that you'll still find it beneficial. Now, high stakes multiple choice tests are not something that I'm particularly excited about. I am really interested in learning and how to improve learning. That said, high stakes tests and multiple choice tests are something that is very important for students. They benefit students, and it's something that they need to show how much they've achieved, and that's good for them and for others. So the reality is they take tests. Now, do students know how to prepare for the tests that they're taking, though? Well, research that's been done on this suggests that they don't. In a 2018 study, it was found that 78% of students use reading and rereading as their primary study method. And this is an ineffective study method. So why would students use a method that is shown not to be effective? Well, the problem is they have what are called inaccurate JOLs. And a JOL is a judgment of learning. So if a student is studying a certain way and they feel that they're improving, they think, yeah, I'm doing great. This is wonderful. But really, the learning's not happening. So that would be an inaccurate JOL. Now, who should teach them how to study more effectively? Well, according to Paul Nation, that is the second most important thing that teachers should be teaching, training the learners how to study effectively. So now the study that I'm conducting is to help inform teachers what works best. We can't tell the students if we don't know ourselves. So the research questions that I'd like to address in this study are, how can multiple choice test takers prepare most effectively? How can a positive testing effect be realized without negative suggestibility, creating false knowledge? And there's some jargon in there, and I'll get to that later on. Which study protocol results in the best long-term retention? Remember, learning is not about short-term, remember, and then let it go 5 minutes later. It's about long-term change in your memory. And then finally, how much improvement can be achieved by one protocol over another? And this is especially true for the novel protocols. Now, the design of the study looks like this. First, there are 100 participants, and I drew from the third year students of a small private university in Hiroshima. And they're students who are not otherwise studying English. That's why I use this cohort, this group, because they would not be getting other input at this time because they weren't taking EIKEN or any other study forms. Now, the first step was a pre-test, to see where they were. The pre-test just was 50 questions, and the difficulty spanned the Sephard levels 5 at A2, 20 at B1, 20 at B2, and 5 at C1. In some preliminary tests, this range of questions gave good results. the students generally were bunched around the middle to low end, so I could see where they were going to, if they were moving or not. So the next thing was an initial common training session. This was done with one target sentence and the key thing in bold language. And I taught it. The explanations were given as I would do in class, pointing out the relationships within the sentence. If there's this here, you've got to use this there, and just a normal teaching session. Following that, there were 4 review sessions, and this is when the different test groups get broken into different types. The study sessions, or review sessions, were generally spaced 2 to 3 days apart. The variance there was because of weekends. Sometimes it's just forced 3 days as opposed to 2. And the students were compensated for the review sessions and the pre-sessions and their post-sessions with 1,000 yen kuo card per session. Okay, so following the training, 1 week following the last training session or practice session, there was 1 post-test. And then following that, 1 month after the final training session, there was another post-test, looking for long-term change in knowledge. Now, each of the test groups had a pro, something that comes from cognitive psychology or neuroscience that could be advantageous to that group, that would sort of indicate, well, this might be something that would help them to do well. But each also had a con that would be disadvantageous to them succeeding or doing better. So there's push and pull on both sides. Okay, let's take a look at the first group. The first group of their review sessions, this was effectively the same as the initial study session. That is, they were looking at a sentence and then the key target language was in bold. They only saw the correct form. So that was the pro. They had maximum exposure to the correct form. The con is that it's kind of low level of attention. Once they saw it, after a few seconds, it was very difficult for them to maintain attention. Also, they had no need to retrieve information from long-term memory and bring it back into the working memory and re-encode it, as it were. And also, there's no prediction of what the correct answer would be. And in recent research is really pointing out and highlighting that prediction is a very, very important part of encoding. In a 2009 study by Jonathan Lee, he found that effectively without prediction, re-encoding was not going to happen. So, second group is very similar to just standard TOEIC, TOEFL study materials. 1 correct answer with 3 lures or distractors. Every session was the same. The pro would be something called transfer appropriate processing. And I'll get to that in a sec, explaining in more detail what that is. The con would be negative suggestibility. So for example, if a student was looking at the question, they didn't know the answer, they have 4 choices to draw from. 1 is correct, the other 3 aren't, but they don't know which one is the correct one necessarily. So they might divide their attention and look at each of them equally. And in studies that have been done on negative suggestibility with multiple choice tests, students who got it correct the first time got it correct on subsequent occasions. Students who got it incorrect on first time got it incorrect on subsequent occasions. So this negative suggestibility was a thing. And it's associated with increased perceptual fluency for the incorrect forms. Perceptual fluency is the ease with which you can perceive something in your environment. It's associated with a very positive affect, i.e., when you see something that's familiar, you have a warm, happy feeling, fuzzy feeling. The recognition causes a positive feeling, which may encourage a student to make an incorrect choice. But if your perceptual fluency is for a bad choice, that's not going to help you on the test. Transfer appropriate processing. Each of the little circles here would be analogous to a neuron, for example. It's a very, very simplistic model. Now, the little triangles here with the pinkish red, light red color, those would be other things in the environment, associated memories. The darker red triangle in the middle may be the core thing you're trying to remember. But because they're associations, that helps to support the memory, the key memory you're trying to form or you're trying to maintain. Whereas here, you've got the associated memories, and these might, at retrieval, these could help to innervate and cause the main memory to be retained or to be recalled. Outside of teaching and learning, you probably are familiar with transfer appropriate processing in the old, you're in one room and you think, I have to go do something in the other room. You walk into the other room and you get there and you go, what did I want? I can't remember. Then you walk back to the first room and now you remember what it was again. Well, that's an example of transfer appropriate processing. The other things in the environment are enough to clue the core memory to be working. So the basic tenet of transfer appropriate processing is that we better remember what we have learned if the cognitive processes that are there during retrieval are the similar as the ones that were there during encoding. If the two match, then you're more likely to have retrieval happen. The third group is the retrieval group. Now this group, they would have a question, the sentence, and in the original training, the target area was bold. Well, in this case, it's blank, there's nothing. It's up to the students to retrieve, to remember what was there. So they would look at this side, try to remember, turn over the card, and confirm if they were right or wrong. This is called the testing effect, or it's also called the testing effect, and it's a very powerful effect. There's no negative suggestibility. You don't have input from other sources. There are no ruses. There are no distractors to distract you. And this is called this is also known as a desirably difficult task. So desirable difficulties is something I'll touch on in a second. The con is that it requires effort. Students, generally speaking, don't like this kind of study. It's kind of a negative for them. Boom. And it can be difficult for students to do correctly. Oftentimes, they will start to look at it, and then before they even recall, they've turned over the card. So really, what they're doing is the same things as test group 1. Okay. Now, I mentioned desirable difficulties. This is a concept or a term created by these two, Elizabeth and Robert Bjork, and they run a cognitive psychology lab at UCLA. Bjork's theory, new theory of disuse, is what desirable difficulty is based upon. And he posits that storage strength, or every memory has two parts, a storage strength and a retrieval strength. And these two are related. So when you start to study something for any amount of time, the very first moment you see it, what you see is stored. It goes into storage very quickly. A large amount of information goes in. But with time spent looking at that source, the storage strength goes down and the retrieval strength goes up. And this makes sense. If you are reading like a same sentence 3 times consecutively, you just read it a second ago. So the retrieval strength is very strong. It's easy to retrieve it. And what's now being encoded gets weaker and weaker and weaker until virtually nothing is being encoded. So Bjork posits it, or puts it like this: when something is very, very accessible right now, virtually no learning can happen. So desirable difficulties forms of study include retrieval practice that this group's using. Another is space practice, which is a desirable difficulty. And then interleave practice. That's the jumbling up of the content. For example, studying past tense one time and then perfects the next time, then simple the time after that.
Jason, about 4
Yes.
minutes until Q&A.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
The final or the fourth group here is the test group 4 is kind of a mixture, a hybrid. It starts out with just one correct answer. So your students are getting clear input. And then one correct answer with one lure, one distractor. Then moves into one correct and two distractors or lures. And finally, you get into the normal shape with one correct answer and three lures. The pros of this are that it's reduced suggestibility effect, especially at this end, where there's not many choices. And the final sessions do have a level of transfer appropriate processing, which is also positive. The negative is kind of the flip side of those. There's still some suggestibility effect in the final sessions, and there's a little bit, but still some, of transfer appropriate processing in the first sessions. Now, the final group was the control group. This group had no practice. They did the initial test, initial training, and then they did the final post-test and then the secondary post-test. They had no study sessions in between, and they did not get paid. That was their con. And they were very sad about that when they get randomly sorted into this group. Now, my expected outcome of this research, which I don't know the answers to yet, is that test group 3, the retrieval group, will see the greatest improvement. I expect it's going to be even stronger at the 1 month stage. And that is because retrieval practice has shown itself, as has prediction, to be very powerful at modifying long-term memory. And if that group isn't the group that does best, my second guess would be group 4. And that was the one with the sort of merging of two types, adding lures or distractors at each stage. I think that this would have perhaps, from a student perspective, they would enjoy this the most. With retrieval practice, students' judgment of learning is often that they feel they're not learning very much at all, when in fact they are. And that gives them a negative affective appreciation for this as a study method. So, do you have any questions, comments, anything you'd like me to go over a bit more? Please I can't see everybody in the room, so if you just yell out, that'd be great.
First up, thanks, Jason, for the presentation so far. Everyone, a round of applause for Jason. Feel free to unmute yourselves and to ask Jason anything you'd like. Not anything related to the presentation, but yeah, Luis.
Anything's fine.
Great presentation, Jason. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Louis.
I also agree and hypothesize probably that group 3 will see the greatest improvements. My own software is based on space repetition, as you know. I was just wondering about the spacing between the sessions. Are you thinking of going with uniform, equal spacing or expanded spacing? So maybe the space will be a week, then 2 weeks, then 3 weeks, or just always a week in between the practice?
Well, there would be, I think that there would be benefit to having expanded sessions because as per the desirable difficulty in the new theory of disuse, what would be coming encoded with each time, like the difficulty or the ease for retrieval would increase over time as you learn the material. So to achieve the same level of difficulty, spacing out would make sense. But for practical standpoint, no, I did not go there. It just, as it stands, getting students to participate, even though I was paying money, and finding a cohort that was able to do it, that their English was not too good or not too low, was very, very difficult. So I had to keep it as the practical aspect of the thing limited exploring those avenues. But it's a good question. And I do think it's something that warrants further research.
Yeah, thank you so much. The only thing I could suggest is use your students in your own classes, and
but then they're actually getting English. So then they're getting English at the same time. So I wanted a group that was, this was basically their only English input. Okay. So that's what I was shooting for.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries, but thank you, Lou.
Great question. Anyone else? If you like, you can unmute yourself and ask, or if you prefer, you can write your question in chat. Anything is okay.
Yeah, Jason, can I ask the question?
Of course.
Yeah, so that was really interesting. And especially when you mentioned how the most effective form of study is not necessarily the one that the students appreciate the most.
Yes.
Which is a massive point for us as educators. So I was wondering how you deal with that issue with your students in terms of motivating them to do something which they might not feel is particularly beneficial. How do you deal with that?
I devote a certain amount of my class times to explaining this stuff to students. And I just show them the research. I'll show them the data. This works. There have been studies done with interleaving, one of those desirable difficulties, where they literally, they had the students study using one way, and then they had students use interleaving. The students using interleaving did 27% better than the students who studied the other way. And still, despite that, the students still said, no, I couldn't have done better. I did better the other way. So it's a real challenge to make students overcome belief. Their judgment of learning is a very powerful thing. So on motivation, I try and make so students enjoy engaging with each other, and then I just force them to study like this, and I explain why I'm doing it. And some of my students have actually come to call it the Jason method in my classes. They know what they're doing, they understand it, that it works, but they just think it's something that I've created, despite me arguing to the contrary. Yeah, but I think it's worth pursuing, though. Yeah, don't give up on them.
Thanks. That's interesting.
Yeah. Oh, if I can just add one more thing to that. Sometimes the metaphor of weightlifting works, because if it's easy, and it's easy to do something like lifting a pen 1,000 times, will never make you stronger. Whereas you have to hit that sweet spot of a desirable difficulty, and any difficulty, like for example, a difficulty of overburdened cognitive load, would not be a desirable difficulty. So you have to explain that difficulty does not mean any challenge. There are certain types of challenge that are good for them, and teach them what those are. Yeah.
That was really interesting. That's a really good point to keep in mind. Thanks for that, Jason.
Yeah, oh, good.
Yeah. Any final questions? We've got, I think, like 1 minute left.
Okay, well, I was going to say thank you. If this research, I don't have enough money to give my students all that much money. So it was funded by EIKEN. So thank you very much to JSPS. And also, if you would like more information, please send me an email. I've got a couple of papers on explaining these things in greater detail that I could send out, or I could also direct you to some excellent papers and books that would also sort of fill in more than what this short presentation can give. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jason. Everyone, please feel free to unmute yourselves or give a virtual round of applause to Jason. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, and I'll stop the recording.
Okay, well, thank you very much there, Chris.